Thank you very much for hosting and organizing this event. I think any political aspect to the digital ecosystem has become more and more important. I'm trying to do that since long, and therefore I'm standing here with somehow sobered view of what can be achieved, and also with some kind of being frightened about the mightiness of the problems we need to solve. Hearing some politicians speak about what has been achieved, I can only say that the biggest threat to success is a small success. And that's what I see constantly, because everybody can calm himself down with having achieved something and uses it as an excuse. So the gearing of what is the problem and what things should we address first is, in the political context, for me, the biggest one. So let me give you some examples. I think we are all celebrating a little bit the punishment or the payments that Google has been sentenced to. And the 2 billion is for us a great number because we are Europeans, we are not used to great numbers. And I'm not proposing it should be more or less, but I'm just trying to familiarize with you some ratios. When we had the subprime crisis, which was originated in the US, Deutsche Bank was sentenced because they helped distributing the papers. And they were sentenced with 7 billion at a time they had 35 billion market cap. So they got a punishment of 20% market cap. We see the same number with Volkswagen. We saw the same number with BNP that got 7.6 billion at a time they had 50 billion market cap. So to be a little bit cynical, if I was Amazon and I knew that I got punished with 8 billion for establishing the Alexa as a facto monopole, I think that would be a great use case for me. So I think having the right, seeing the chance and the destructive potential of not very decisively act on those things on a political level is very dangerous. The other thing that I very often hear, especially in the political context, is the energy which is put on broadband. Yes, broadband is important. It costs us several hundred billion euros, and then we have a fast broadband. But here is an example. The moment, 2 weeks after Netflix launched in the Netherlands, 2 weeks after that, they were responsible for 60 to 70% of the network traffic in Ziggo. So meaning, we need to be careful that investing the 400 billion in the broadband doesn't lead to faster motorways for monopolists that we have forgotten to deal with in the meantime. So that is, I think this is very, very much a focus of my attention. So that's why I want to put it on a different level if we look at digitization and geopolitics. Let's see what were the different cycles that brought prosperity to Europe. So the first was the cultivation, because we had an advantage in the weather and the climate, which was a very national exercise. Then we had the industrialization, and now we do have the digitalization, which makes or breaks the wealth in 20 or 30 years. In order to have the discussion with some of the political leaders, I thought maybe I have to transfer it into a currency that is well understood in these circles. And I teamed up with the Deutsche Institut für Wirtschaftsforschung, and we analyzed the effects of trade surpluses and trade deficits. So, but back to this stream. So here is the relative development of wealth in the cultivation phase, in the industrialization phase, and then we have digitization phase. And I still remember a vivid discussion I had with Paul Bernhard like 10 years back when I was proposing that we should do some kind of protectionism, which is not in our DNA, but China used it, and it was a reason why they finally got to the point where they are. Had they opened their market very openly, then none of their companies would have had a chance to get to a marginal cost or marginal revenue structure which entitles them now to compete head-to-head with the US. The other thing which is interesting is at the end of the industrialization, these are the numbers that are in the current political discussions from the US are put against us. This trade surplus that we have overall is something which is perceived as being inadequate and should be worked upon. And I do think that is a favorable neglection of the entire picture, because if you split the trade balance into the old industry and the new industry, you quickly see that in the new industry, which forward-looking have a way higher impact, we actually have a pretty significant trade deficit. So in all Europe, it is probably something like 68 billion. And in Germany, it's something like 24 plus or 25 plus. So this comes with a lot of consequences. And the consequences, I mean, this is a rough estimates in seeing what do we import and what do we roughly export. So how can we act upon this? So I think we are assembled here to discuss on the political sphere what kind of levers of influence do we have. So we have a political sphere and we do have a financial sphere. And the financial sphere is also as important to act on like the political one. I do the political one pretty fast because it has already been worked on, meaning, okay, from the prerequisites, we should be pretty well equipped because we have a lot of inhabitants, we have a lot of buying power, but we still try to keep things small. So Tim Höttges from Deutsche Telekom always says regulation makes us fly around with half-empty planes, whereas our competitor in the US can fill up the planes. That at some point will hit you in your economics. So the other question I did already address is which topics do we address first? I think it is easy to address broadband because the worst thing that can happen to you is 5 years later and there's nothing at risk if you deal with it. All other measures that we need to take are very difficult to communicate to the voters. They have a very unsecure outcome, so it's not even clear if you deal with it on a political level, you get the rewards. And it takes long. So the third one is we need ownership. So the political one is one, but ownership in companies is a very important way to also act on those. So here is the situation which we discussed on this protectionism. The protectionism has led to totally different outcomes if it comes to the use of search engines and all the implications, because all of us certainly know it's not just a search engine. It comes with a lot of aspects like education, like forming opinions in all these kind of things. So we clearly see that there has been a role model for one easier to govern place to take advantage of protectionism. So the financial sphere, we also addressed it, so I will quickly go through the obvious ones. We are underfunded, which is interesting because in classical R&D spending, we are not underfunding, just if it comes to software. I think that's the typical view here is we are great engineers, we have a lot of cool research, but if it comes to software, we suck. So going back to the topic of capital and trying to give it a totally different view. So I think Clark has said already, the numbers are tiny. The numbers for putting in a global context is 0.77%. I was mocking if we, as a venture industry, got all the money from speeding or park tickets, we would flood our market by 5 times. So I think that's the size we are discussing here. So having a digital deficit or capital or the negative capital balance on investments means at the same time that we are exporting governance. So, because if foreign investors sit in our cap tables, at some point they define what will happen with the companies that we breed here. And if you look at the big companies, the big winners, the big checks have all been written by foreign funds. So at some point in time, if there's a decisive thing to decide, it is not us or European-led capital pools that will have any say in that. So same goes for the big ones. And now comes my favorite numbers, which show how we have to rethink all that. So take the top 30 platforms, or 20, that dominate the world right now. They are not listed. So they are so big that they have a political influence, and we have taken part with European money in 14% of the financing rounds. Europe has invested 1.98% in these companies, and they are represented with 1.44% in the cap table. Is that the way we think of Europe as taking part in worldwide decisions? I think that is a total capitalization. These numbers for me is shocking, because it means we are marginalized with every decision that is taken in the big companies that have political power. So the counterexample, who has really done well in this, is the Software Vision Fund that Clark already alluded to. They have a view that technology will really drive a lot of these super geopolitical power decisions, and therefore they buy into very important companies to have a say in the cap table. Let's be cynical again. If you have a vision software fund with 93 billion in assets, the cumulative funding volume of the biggest 30 digital companies, like the Ubers, Airbnbs, the last 10 years was 67 billion. With a fund like this, one guy that governs this fund could have done the entire financing rounds and would be the power play in the supervisory board, in the cap table of these companies. This has a political dimension. So, and being represented with 1.48% also has a political dimension, but a very unfavorable one to us. So this is, I think, the way how we do need to think about dealing with these companies, with these new challenges. On the one hand, we have a regulatory element. On the other hand, we have to it's so easy with this 0.77% to take our own fortune a little bit more in our hands and try to work that we will be represented, at least proportionally to our GDP worldwide or whatever, but not with 1 point something percent. So with these kind of thoughts, I think it has become obvious that the step up in allocating this money to this industry in one way or another is really, really important. And I've always often heard that, yes, we tried with from family offices, we tried that in the 2000s and we burned our fingers. That's a typical approach we have, and therefore nobody wants to invest. But it has shown that, especially with this low interest rate environment, there is no excuse, nor from an insurance, nor from anybody else, not to allocate money into this asset class, because it is performing, the ecosystem has matured, and therefore I hope that as well political initiatives allow these pension funds to invest, and also that there is a clear view within the pension funds that it is way more about the return. It is about founding the prerequisites to enable Europe to take part in these kind of decisions worldwide. Thank you very much.